Welcome back to the fishbowl. Today we're going somewhere most people don't like to go. We're talking about death. We're talking about funerals. We're talking about money. We're talking about life insurance, wills, final wishes, and the people who are left behind after we're gone. And we're going to ask a question that might make some people uncomfortable. In the words of Tupac, how long will they mourn me? And let me add, who's going to pay for my funeral? That's not meant to be a disrespectful question. It's actually a question about responsibility. Because when somebody dies, the person who died is no longer here to worry about the bills, the decisions, the paperwork, or the arrangements. The people who are still alive have to deal with all of it. And while they're trying to process the fact that somebody they love is gone, they're also being asked to make financial decisions, contact funeral homes, locate documents, figure out insurance, deal with banks and bills, and make choices about how their loved one will be laid to rest. So today, we're going to have the conversation that many families don't have until it's too late. Let's start with the funeral, because that's usually where everything becomes real. Somebody dies, and suddenly everybody is asking, what are we going to do? Burial, cremation, funeral service, memorial service, casket, cemetery, flowers, transportation, obituary. And then eventually somebody asks the question nobody wants to ask. How much is this going to cost? That's when emotions and money collide. You're grieving, but you're also looking at a bill. You're trying to honor somebody, but you may not have thousands of dollars sitting in your bank account. And sometimes families feel like choosing a less expensive option means they didn't love the person enough. But let's stop right there. Does the price of a funeral determine how much somebody was loved? Does spending $15,000 mean you loved somebody more than the family that spent $3,000? Does a beautiful casket somehow prove that the person was important? Or have we created a culture where families feel pressure to spend money they don't have because they're afraid somebody will judge them? Because here's the truth, the person in the casket isn't going home. The people who paid for the funeral are. The funeral eventually ends. Everybody goes home. The flowers die. The visitors leave. The food gets eaten. The programs get put away. But the surviving family still has to live. They still have rent or a mortgage. They still have groceries. They still have children to take care of. They still have jobs to go back to. They still have bills coming in, and they're grieving. So I want to ask this question. Are we thinking enough about the people who have to live after the funeral? Because sometimes we spend so much time thinking about giving somebody the perfect goodbye that we forget the people who have to wake up the next morning and figure out how to continue living without them. And that brings us to life insurance. Let's be honest, a lot of people don't want to talk about it. Some people don't have it. Some people have a small policy. Some people have coverage through work and assume that's enough. Some people say, I'm young, I don't need to worry about that. Some people say, I can't afford it. And some people simply don't want to think about dying. But life insurance isn't really about you. You're not going to be here to use it. It's about the people who remain. It's about replacing some of the financial support that disappears when a person dies. It's about giving the family breathing room. It's about funeral expenses, housing, childcare, debts, education, and all of the everyday expenses that don't disappear just because someone did. The question isn't simply, do you have life insurance? The bigger question is, if you weren't here tomorrow, what financial hole would your family be left standing in? Now, before anybody hears this and thinks we're judging people who don't have insurance, we're not. Life is complicated. Money is complicated. Some people genuinely cannot afford much coverage. Some people are living paycheck to paycheck. Some people are taking care of children, parents, or other family members. Some people are dealing with financial circumstances that make planning difficult. This isn't about shaming people for what they don't have. It's about asking whether we've at least thought about the problem. Because sometimes we don't need to have every answer today, but we do need to start asking the questions. What would happen? Who would handle it? What resources would be available? What would my family need? Then we get to the will. And I think people have a misconception about wills. Some people hear the word will and immediately think, I don't have enough money or property to need one. But a will isn't only about being rich. It's about putting your wishes somewhere other than inside your head. It's about making your intentions clearer to the people who have to deal with your estate. What happens to your belongings? Who should receive certain things? Who should handle your estate? What do you want your family to know? What happens if you don't leave instructions? When families are grieving, disagreements can happen quickly. Something as simple as who gets a piece of jewelry, a vehicle, a family heirloom, or personal belongings can become an emotional battle. And sometimes the issue isn't even the monetary value, it's what that object represents. Think about how many families don't know where everything is. They don't know what bank someone uses. They don't know whether there is a life insurance policy. They don't know where important documents are. They don't know what bills are automatically coming out of the person's account. They don't know what subscriptions exist. They don't know what the person's final wishes were. And then somebody dies, and suddenly the family is playing detective. Why do we make people we love become detectives after we're gone? Why not give them some information while we're here? We don't have to make the conversation dramatic. We can simply say, here are my important documents. Here's who you need to contact. Here's what I want. Here's what I don't want. That isn't morbid. That's preparation. And let's talk about why people avoid these conversations. Maybe we're afraid that talking about death makes it real. Maybe we think talking about our final wishes is negative. Maybe we don't want our children to think about us dying. Maybe we don't want to admit that we don't have enough money. Maybe we don't want to think about our own mortality. Or maybe we're simply procrastinating. I'll do it later. That's one of the most dangerous phrases when it comes to planning. I'll get the insurance later. I'll write the will later. I'll tell my family what I want later. I'll organize my paperwork later. But what if later doesn't come? Nobody gets a guarantee that they'll have another year, another month, or even another day to get their affairs together. Now let's make this conversation uncomfortable. If you died tomorrow with no life insurance, no savings, no will, and no instructions, who are you expecting to handle everything? Your spouse, your children, your parents, your brothers and sisters, your friends, your church? Who? And if everyone is already struggling financially, where does the money come from? Do your children have to take money out of their own household to bury you? Does your spouse have to put the funeral on a credit card? Does somebody have to borrow money? Does somebody have to start a fundraiser? And if nobody has the money, then what? These aren't hypothetical questions for every family. For some families, this is exactly what happens. But I also want to challenge the idea that the family should automatically be expected to figure it out. Why should the people who are grieving have to inherit the financial consequences of our lack of preparation? There are circumstances where people simply don't have the resources to plan, and that's different. But if you have the ability to do some planning and repeatedly choose not to, should your family have to pay the price for that decision? That's where personal responsibility enters the conversation. We can't control everything about death. We can't control when it happens. We can't control every financial circumstance. But we can control whether we have a conversation. We can organize information. We can document our wishes. We can investigate insurance options. We can learn what legal documents we need. We can tell somebody where important information is located. And then there's the emotional side of all of this. Who gets to decide what my final wishes are? What if you want cremation, but your family wants a traditional burial? What if you don't want a funeral, but your family desperately needs a service to say goodbye? What if you want something simple, but your family believes you deserve something elaborate? What if your family has religious or cultural traditions that are different from what you wanted? These conversations can be difficult because death doesn't just affect one person. The person who died has wishes, but the people who remain have grief. Sometimes those things line up and sometimes they don't. That's why having these conversations while you're alive can be so valuable. Let your family hear your wishes from you rather than trying to guess after you're gone. And here's where I want to challenge the idea of what a funeral is supposed to be. Who is the funeral really for? Is it for the person who died, or is it for the people who are still alive? Maybe it's both. Maybe the person who died is being honored, but the people who remain are the ones who need the opportunity to say goodbye. And if the funeral is for the living too, then shouldn't we think about their financial future as well? If spending $20,000 on a funeral means your spouse can't pay the mortgage for the next 3 months, did we really honor the family? If your children have to go into debt to give you a funeral that looked impressive, would that be what you wanted? Maybe the greatest final act of love isn't an expensive funeral. Maybe it's leaving your family with as little unnecessary burden as possible. Because the funeral is one day, grief can last years. The financial consequences can last even longer. Somebody can lose a spouse and suddenly become a single income household. A child can lose a parent and suddenly have responsibilities they never expected. A family can lose the person who paid the majority of the bills and discover that the funeral was actually the easiest financial problem they're going to face. That's why this conversation has to go beyond how are we going to bury you? We need to ask, how are the people you love going to live without you? And maybe that's the real meaning behind our title. How long will they mourn me? We don't know. Some people will mourn us for the rest of their lives. Some people will remember us every birthday, every holiday, every anniversary. Some people will hear a song and think about us. Some people will see our favorite food in a grocery store and remember us. Grief doesn't have a schedule, but eventually the people we leave behind have to get up. They have to go to work. They have to raise their children. They have to pay the bills. They have to laugh again without feeling guilty. They have to figure out how to live in a world where we're no longer physically present. And that's why what we leave behind matters. So maybe the question isn't just how long will they mourn me? Maybe the better question is, what am I leaving them to deal with while they're mourning me? Am I leaving them love and memories? Am I leaving them instructions? Am I leaving them organized documents? Am I leaving them a will? Am I leaving them some financial protection if I have the ability to do so? Or am I leaving them a pile of questions and saying, figure it out? Because none of us gets to choose exactly how our story ends. But while we're here, we can choose whether we have the conversation. We can choose whether we make our wishes known. We can choose whether we try to protect the people who depend on us. We can choose whether we make the process easier for the people who will eventually have to say goodbye. Maybe planning for death isn't really about death at all. Maybe it's about love. Maybe it's about responsibility. Maybe it's about looking at the people we love and saying, I know you will hurt when I'm gone, and I don't want to make that hurt harder than it already has to be. So I'm leaving you with one final fishbowl question. If you died tomorrow, would your family know what you wanted? And would they know how to pay for it? Thank you for sitting in the bowl with me. Let's rise to the surface and decompress. Until we dive again, keep it classy, stay curious, and ever evolving.